Human beings do not simply hate risk or love risk. We do both, depending on the frame. This episode continues Kahneman's section on choices. We cover the fourfold pattern: rare events, risk policies, and keeping score. These chapters explain why people buy lottery tickets and insurance, cling to bad chances, and treat money differently, depending on which mental account it occupies. Chapter 29 presents the fourfold pattern. When facing a high probability gain, people often become risk-averse. They prefer a sure gain to a gamble with slightly higher expected value. When facing a high probability loss, people often become risk-seeking. They may gamble to avoid accepting a sure loss. For low probability gains, people become risk-seeking. This helps explain lotteries. A tiny chance of a large gain receives too much weight. For low probability losses, people become risk-averse. This helps explain insurance and anxiety about unlikely disasters. A tiny chance of a bad outcome can loom large. The pattern comes from probability weighting. People do not treat probabilities linearly. We overweight small probabilities and underweight or emotionally distort larger ones. The endpoints, impossibility, and certainty are especially powerful. Chapter 30 focuses on rare events. Rare events are often either ignored or overweight. If the rare event is not on your mind, you may neglect it. If it is vivid, described, recent, or emotionally charged, you may overweight it. Attention determines weight. This has obvious consequences for public fear, investment decisions, health choices, and policy debates. A rare event can dominate judgment if it is imaginable enough. At the same time, genuinely important rare risks can be ignored when they are abstract. The mind is not a neutral probability machine. It is an attention machine. Kahneman distinguishes decisions from experience and decisions from description. When people learn from experience, rare events may be underweight because they are rarely encountered. When people learn from vivid descriptions, rare events may be overweight. How information arrives changes choice. Chapter 31 introduces risk policies. A risk policy is a broad rule for handling repeated risks. Instead of deciding each gamble in isolation, you adopt a policy that makes sense across many similar decisions. This helps reduce the emotional noise of individual losses. For example, a person may reject a favorable gamble when seeing it alone because the possible loss hurts. But if the same kind of favorable gamble will occur many times, accepting the class of gambles may be wise. Broad framing often improves decisions. Narrow framing is the enemy. We isolate one decision, one account, one possible regret. Broad framing asks how this decision fits a larger pattern. Investors, managers, and ordinary people often benefit from broader frames because they reduce the power of any single loss. Chapter 32 examines mental accounts. People keep score in separate categories: vacation money, grocery money, bonus money, house money, sunk costs, paper gains, realized losses. Economically, money is fungible. Psychologically, it is labeled. Mental accounting can help self-control, but it also creates mistakes. People may refuse to sell a losing stock because realizing the loss closes the account painfully. They may spend a bonus more freely than salary. They may stay at a bad event because the ticket was expensive. The sunk cost fallacy is mental accounting refusing to let a dead cost stay dead. Regret plays a major role. People anticipate regret and choose in ways that protect themselves from feeling foolish later. This can make them conservative, or it can make them double down. The emotional bookkeeping matters as much as the financial bookkeeping. These chapters help explain why decision quality often requires choosing the right frame before choosing the option. A narrow frame makes every loss personal. A broad frame makes patterns visible. A mental account can support discipline or trap you in yesterday's mistake. The practical question is, am I deciding this one case in isolation when I should be using a policy? Am I overweighting a rare event because it is vivid? Am I ignoring a rare event because it is abstract? Am I keeping score in a way that makes future decisions worse? The fourfold pattern is useful because it explains why the same person can look cautious in one setting and reckless in another. Someone may refuse a favorable moderate gamble because the possible loss feels painful, then buy a lottery ticket because the tiny chance of a huge gain feels exciting. The contradiction is not random. It follows the emotional weighting of probabilities and outcomes. With high probability gains, certainty has special appeal. A sure gain feels safe, complete, and satisfying. People often pay to remove the last bit of uncertainty. With high probability losses, the same person may gamble because the sure loss feels intolerable. The gamble may be objectively worse, but it preserves the possibility of escape. Low probabilities create another distortion. A tiny chance of winning a life-changing prize can be overweight because possibility becomes emotionally vivid. A tiny chance of disaster can also be overweight when the disaster is imaginable. This is the psychology behind both lotteries and some forms of insurance. The mind is not simply calculating expected value. It is reacting to possibility. Rare events are therefore governed by attention. If the rare event is out of sight, it may be neglected. If it is vivid, available, described in detail, or socially amplified, it may dominate. This is one reason the same person can ignore a serious long-term risk and obsess over a dramatic, but less likely one. The difference is not only probability, it is mental presence. Kahneman's discussion of decisions from experience and decisions from description matters here. If you learn by experience, rare events may not appear often enough to shape behavior. If you learn by description, especially vivid description, rare events can loom too large. A spreadsheet and a shocking story do not enter the mind through the same door. Risk policies are Kahneman's practical answer to narrow framing. If you evaluate every risk separately, each potential loss gets its own emotional spotlight. A broad policy reduces that spotlight effect. It says, I will accept this class of favorable risks over time. I will not renegotiate my philosophy every time a single loss becomes possible. Investors need this, but so do ordinary people. A freelancer deciding whether to pitch clients, a company deciding whether to fund experiments, a person deciding whether to have difficult conversations, a manager deciding whether to hire from an imperfect pool. All face repeated risks. A policy can protect decision-making from the mood of the latest outcome. Mental accounting complicates this because people do not experience all money or effort as equal. A tax refund feels different from salary. A bonus feels different from savings. A losing investment feels different once the loss is realized. A prepaid ticket creates pressure to attend even when the event no longer seems worth the time. The account label changes behavior. Mental accounts can be helpful. Budget categories can support discipline. Setting aside money for rent, savings, or charity may prevent impulsive spending. The problem comes when the categories override reality. Money already spent is gone. A losing position does not become better because selling would hurt. A bad evening does not become good because the ticket was expensive. Regret is the emotional glue in many mental accounts. People fear the pain of admitting a mistake. They fear closing the account. They fear the story that would follow. I wasted money. I chose badly. I should have known. So they continue. Kahneman's framework helps us see that sometimes the future is being sacrificed to protect the remembering self from embarrassment. The practical discipline is to ask what decision you would make if the account were already closed. If the ticket were free, would you go? If the stock were cash, would you buy it today? If the project had not already consumed 6 months, would you start it now? These questions force the decision back into the future where it belongs. Thank you for listening. Next, we finish the choices section with reversals, frames, and reality, then begin the book's final movement, the two selves. Final close. Kahneman's risk chapters show that the question is not whether we are brave or cautious. The question is which frame made us feel that way.